This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I am your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, the Cap in Capitalize. And today we have a very special guest. He is the best-selling author, not just best-selling author, the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of Begin with We. Now he consults top leaders in businesses all around the world. Kyle McDowell, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, great to be here. It's been something I've been looking forward to, man. Good to join you.
Absolutely. And before we dive into your book, because I have a just obscene amount of questions, I want our listeners, our capitalizers, to have a little bit more of a background of not only who you are, but what led you to writing this book. So give us Kyle McDowell 101 briefly, if you will.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm a guy, I spent nearly 30 years in corporate America. I took a job right out of high school at a regional bank and just kind of found myself ascending through the corporate ranks, if you will. And I wound up a career about 28 years later where I felt like it was time for a change. I had led massive cultural turnarounds. I had led massive organizations. For example, my last role was with a pharmaceutical company where I had a 15,000 person team that I led. I had a $2 billion budget. Prior to that, I had a very similar size role where I had another 14,000 employees across 11 locations doing really, really impactful work for the federal government. So I've always led large organizations, almost always with an operations slant. And I had an opportunity to join a company in 2016 where I was given pretty much free rein in terms of establishing a culture. And I was warned that the role I was taking was not without some culture improvement opportunities. So I knew I had to put in the transformation work. Well, the night before I was to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders in my new role, I'd been with the company about 60 days. Everyone flew into Lawrence, Kansas to meet me and for me to meet them, kind of break bread, get to know the new guy. Well, Chris, it was the night before I lay in my hotel room, probably around midnight. I had no idea what I was going to say to that team the next day. I was terrified. But I had told myself in the years leading up to this opportunity, if I ever had a chance to lead the way that I was never led, with a mentality that really put an emphasis on the team, on the individuals of the team, the collection of the team, and less so about me, because I spent the previous 20 plus years really maniacally focused on my own growth, focused on ascending as high as I could inside of corporate America. And by most accounts, I had a very, very successful run. I'm a lucky guy. Mm-hmm. But I wanted this to be different because throughout my journey, I found myself becoming almost apathetic towards the environments I even helped create. I saw way more bureaucracy in big companies than I thought was healthy. I saw a double standard when it came to the leadership folks and those on the team, something that I've coined the leadership gap. So I found myself thinking, I need a change. This opportunity presented itself. Now I'm in front of these 40 to 50 leaders in Lawrence, Kansas. And it was kind of a gut check moment for me, man. So about 2 hours elapsed. And at the end of that 2 hours, in front of me, I had 10 sentences. And I got to tell you, buddy, there was no pre-planning. I had no idea what was about to happen. Those 10 sentences each started with the word we, again, without any pre-planning. I'm not super creative, man. So I looked down at my laptop. I said, I have 10 sentences. They all start with we. I've got the 10 we's. And the spirit of the 10 we's, and I didn't realize it at the time, I didn't call them this at the time, but they are principles. And to nerd out for a moment, as you know, a principle is nothing more than a fundamental truth. It's something we hold to be true. It's our system of beliefs. So my goal was to get these principles in front of the team and say, guys, these are the rules of the road by which I expect you to hold me accountable. I led that way. Because why? I think it's fair for you to hold me accountable to these rules or these principles, because I'm going to hold you to the exact same principles. No double standard, no leadership gap. This is our ethos. This is who we are. About 50% of the audience looked at me with kind of some approval, skeptical approval. I would say another quarter of the audience seemed really excited. I guess I was kind of the antithesis of what they had in their previous leader. And the last 15%, you could tell, just weren't buying it. They did not buy it at all. And I'll save you all the drama between that moment and today, but suffice to say, I left that organization in 2019. The 10 We's are still the cultural manifesto, if you will, for that part of the organization. They have the We Awards twice a year, where they give out awards for folks that are caught, if you will, living these 10 principles. So when I left that role, I joined this is the pharmaceutical company that I joined. And about a year into that gig, the apathy had set back in. And I realized not all organizations are ripe for transformation. Some are very hungry for it. Some say they're hungry for it. But when it comes to the actual blocking and tackling of that exercise, it is less than, it takes a strong stomach, especially in a very, very big organization. I was at a crossroad at that point. Do I continue to kind of bang my head against the wall and try to transform an organization, or do I take these principles and evangelize them more broadly? And I chose option 2. So one evening, sitting with my then girlfriend, now fiance, I turned to her, I said, I think I'm going to write a book. She's like, what? Because I'd never discussed it before. Never in my life did I think I would be a best-selling author. And then I made a few phone calls to members of my team from that organization that we had such the magical transformation. I called them because I still have one-on-ones with individuals from that leadership group multiple years later. And I asked them, is this something that you think holds value? I've been gone for a while. Are you still living it? Because I always feared, Chris, at multiple times throughout that journey that I was getting a little bit of brown nosing. The boss's jokes are always the funniest. We must embrace these principles or else. Yeah. And they were the loudest voices in my ear saying, Kyle, you have to do this. You have to put the book together. So a year and a half goes by. The book comes out. It's been out since September of 22. As you mentioned, it's become a bestseller on a few different platforms. It reached the #1 bestseller category in 9 different categories in Amazon. So really, really proud and so humbled with the path that's gotten me to this point here today.
Awesome. Yeah, well, and it's an honor to be fellow book bros because our books came out at about the same time.
That's right, book bro. I like that.
And speaking of your book, I think it's time, now that we've set the stage, to dive on in. And by the way, Capitalizers, if you have not put 2 and 2 together, you need to go buy Begin With We on Amazon immediately. And if not, really, again, no pressure, but I will be very disappointed in you. So getting right into it, your first we is we do the right thing always. Mm-hmm. And you referenced a tragic but great story of how Harry Kramer, Baxter's CEO in the early 2000s, did the painfully right thing in regards to the dialysis scandal. And as I was thinking about this story and your consulting with these corporations, my question, it's a little bit abstract, it's a little vulnerable, but it's extremely valuable. If you may be vulnerable, what have been some of your Baxter moments within your own career, and what were the end results of getting through those troubling tunnels?
Well, let me just set some context for your listeners first. So Harry Kramer is a former CEO of Baxter Healthcare, I believe. They, at the time, were a $5 billion company, 50,000+ employees. They had built a machine that just tragically, so unfortunate, resulted in the death of 53 people. Harry Kramer went on to be a best-selling author. He's a MBA professor where I met him at Kellogg, and happens to be one of the best human beings you'll ever meet. So for context for your listeners, those or your viewers, they had the worst thing possible for a medical device company, lost a lot of lives. Harry, as the CEO, did not sweep it under the rug, accept full responsibility, cut his own pay, went to the homes of many of the family of the victims, So here's a guy that stepped right up and put his chin out and said, we did this and we're going to do the right thing. For me personally, getting to know Harry, it instilled in me the fact that no matter what you do, you must do the right thing or everything else is a house of cards. So when you ask me, what are my Baxter moments or my Harry Kramer moments? The first one that comes to mind is a story I told in the book, actually. I was leading an organization that had a presence of about 1,000 people in the panhandle of Florida. It was 2000, I want to say 18. Hurricane Michael hit the panhandle. Devastation unlike anything I have ever seen with my own eyes in person. Just tragedy. Well, the company I was with at the time had a very, very low tolerance for doing anything public that could be perceived as preferential to a certain group, or could set a precedent that they maybe not would be comfortable kind of continuing that precedent. In this case, the precedent that I asked our president to set was, give me some money to help these multiple hundreds, if not over 1,000 people who are displaced because their homes no longer exist. The answer was no. Second thing, okay, well, if we can't give money, can we donate vacation time so these folks can continue to get paid while they try to get their lives back on track? The answer was, we've never done that before and we don't want to set a precedent. The answer is no. Just shocking to me when we have 1,000 people from our own family who are displaced. My leadership team, we got off site, had a phone call within about 3 hours of the hurricane making landfall. I remember saying very clearly, if anything blows back on us for going against the will and the wishes of our president of the organization at that time, I will take that personally. I will own this. Chris, before that phone call ended, we had a GoFundMe up. We had arranged travel for two of us from the leadership team, myself and a fellow by the name of John Hess, to land into the Panhandle to see the devastation firsthand, to meet with the folks that were still coming to work in a damaged building. We had people sleeping in cars and still working. That's the dedication this team showed. So while, cut to the chase, the do the right thing moment was so manyfold in that scenario, because here I was, the guy that espouses and evangelizes these principles, leading with do the right thing, and how I'm the we-focused leader. If I didn't do what we did, I'm just a giant hypocrite. So without any kind of regard for what the blowback or repercussions for me might be, recognizing the value that is going to be realized by these poor souls who had undergone such a dramatic tragedy, that was an easy choice. And when I see folks that were a part of that site up in the Panhandle, there's usually tears, and it's been years later, because the impact that we showed and we had on that group of our family was so paramount to the ongoing and rebuilding kind of success that they've had since then. So that's the first and easiest example for me. And Chris, we do the right thing is the first of the 10 principles for one very reason. Everything else is a house of cards if we don't first endeavor to do the right thing. Now, we can disagree on what the right thing is, and we should if we have differing opinions. But in my mind, if we do the right thing, we look through 3 different lenses, and that's the lens of the company, the client, and the crew. And in that order. And to be honest, man, I'm one of the most employee-friendly guys you'll ever meet. But if there's no company, there's no client. And if there's no client, there's no crew. If you can make a decision, if you're at a crossroad looking to make a decision, if you can hit all 3 of those cohorts, home run. If you hit 2 of the 3, we'll live with that. And at the minimum, you've got to hit one of those 3 cohorts, but you'll know there's one cohort conspicuously missing from that group, and that's me. There's no I. So when I'm endeavoring to do the right thing for my team, never should I look through the lens of Kyle. I need to look at those 3 cohorts.
Well, in speaking of that, so one of the stories that struck me in an amazing way was Trader Joe's and how they positively elevated their employees during COVID at the very beginning. And you recommend, quote, when you do the right thing, publicize it as widely as possible, especially internally amongst your team and company, end quote. Now, as someone that analyzes companies on behalf of clients, that can be, not always, but it can be a double-edged sword, because I've also caught companies on the flip side where they're doing that but it's to steer away from the negativity that is clouding a company. And so my question is for you, if you were an executive, how would you balance that very valuable but also rather dicey act?
Look, you used a word earlier that's probably going to be used multiple times during this conversation. That's vulnerability. And I actually, as a leader, as a human, as a man, I pride myself on my vulnerability. But on the flip side of that, if we're going to be vulnerable and open about our flaws, as I say, warts and all, if we're going to be open about that, we should also be very open about our strengths, the things that we're very, very proud of, our accomplishments. And as a team and as a leader of a team, being really overt about sharing those wins and sharing the successes and the big moments of our journey, I mean, they're absolutely critical, because if we don't take a moment to stop and recognize a job well done, congratulate the team, give each other a pat on the back, some knuckles, give each other a hug. Like, if we don't take the time to do that, shame on us, right? Shame on us. If I'm balancing that decision with the thought in mind that it might be perceived that I'm only doing it to counteract or counter something negative that's going on, I'll live with that all day long. I've got no problem with that. In times of calm water, I want to advertise and be very outspoken about our successes. In times of rough waters, I want to be just as outspoken and overt in sharing. Why? Because anything else would be inconsistent. And I think way too many of us throughout the journey, our corporate journeys, our careers, have seen nothing but inconsistency from leaders. So I'm going to be super consistent, even at the possibility of my own kind of peril or blowback. As a matter of fact, if I'm absolutely faced with talking about a negative situation or a positive situation and a win, I'm going to talk about both, and probably in that order. First, to acknowledge we've got some opportunities, and then go right into we're doing the right thing. We're doing it for our people, and you're doing business with someone who cares about the team that serves you.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you actually mentioned a couple questions, just switching gears a little bit, regarding your authentic self that I found extremely valuable. And especially when it comes to the pivotal moment in one's life where you either put it in cruise control or you get off the pot to profoundly move your needle. And some of the questions that I appreciated were, quote, is the money I'm making worth it? Yeah. Am I really content staying with a company that won't allow me to be me? So most of us that have taken that entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial leap, admittedly we've asked that multiple times. And my question to you is, how many times did you sit on cruise control until you decided to make the leap? And then could you remember the initial time that you asked yourself that question? And do you wish you took that step sooner than when you originally did?
Well, a lot of questions wrapped up in that one. And I'm gonna go in the reverse order in which you asked them. Never has there ever been a moment where I questioning, am I in this for the right reasons? Never. When did it first happen? It probably happened around year 24 of my career. And I'm not proud of that, actually. In hindsight, I wish I'd come to it so much earlier. Chris, I have another business that I run that we won't get into, but it has a few hundred employees. And I was meeting with the leader of that team recently, and he told me, he was a 22-year-old supervisor. He says he wants to be a pilot. He has no desire to stay in corporate America. He wants to travel the world and be a pilot. And I looked at him right in the eye. I said, don't you ever, ever, ever lose that passion. If that's what you want to do today, life will get in the way. Job will get in the way. Family will get in the way. Life will have other plans. The universe will have other plans for you. And I can see in your eyes, man, this is something you're really passionate about. He told me, and the reason I landed on that, by the way, he told me he stops by the airport 2 or 3 times a month just to watch planes take off and land. How about that for passion, right? I was a guy, though, that was really focused on, frankly, money. I wanted to have a big team, which would pay me a lot of money. I needed that for my ego at the time. I didn't realize it, but it was 100% ego. I needed to impress people that don't care about me and that I really shouldn't care about them. It was really all the wrong reasons, which is why I'm not really proud of that. But once I realized it, And it was a real light switch, almost a light switch for me. And it's connected to the story I told earlier when I joined the organization, formed the 10 We's and shared it with that team. It was almost a light switch for me because I could feel, almost quite physically feel a team of a bunch of very talented individuals become a team of one. I watched them become energetic about things that they were no longer energetic about for years prior. I watched them care more about the success of their peers and our overall growth and success than their individual success. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. And that was the moment that I realized that I had lost an opportunity for years. And I'll tell you this one other thing to add to that, Chris. And I think it's a really strong commentary about where we are right now. I left the organization in 2019. I told you I still have conversations regularly with a couple of them. I have one-on-ones on an almost monthly basis with 2 or 3 members of that team. I can't say that about any other job I've ever had, any other company I've ever been with, where I am still multiple years later on a very, very frequent basis chatting with those folks. I'm having dinner with this team week after next, actually. Again, I left 4+ years ago. So I wish I came to the conclusion sooner, because I think about the lost relationships that I may have, the relationships I could have lost or did lose, but also I think the impact. I stopped focusing on metrics and started focusing on relationships, and the metrics started to take care of themselves. And then there's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's been the experience I've had.
Yes, that is the true enlightenment of compounding, if I could sum it up in one sentence.
Well said.
Now, processes, okay? They're a thing that I personally am obsessive over. Now, likewise. I thought that was because I've always been enamored with sales and service processes, because at the end of the day, salespeople are running the ship. But now I know it's more so just with like the general business sense of being as efficient as possible. And we talked about this a little bit pre-show. So one of my biggest peeves is when businesses or business partners have either zero process or really just no understanding of their services or processes. And I'm well aware that I'm not this brilliant, business savant. But my question to you is, why is this seemingly obvious, do this and you'll win, highly overlooked, especially in these massive companies? Because it's not like they don't have the resources.
I think it's twofold. The first is, and I think it all, by the way, in both of my responses, it all comes back to leadership.
Right.
And in my experience, the bigger the company, the more gray, if you will, is involved in ownership of things. And even when there is clear ownership, the leader of the person or group that is responsible for developing said process often fails to get who is on point for this responsibility, by when will this responsibility be created, and what barriers might I help you knock down in the process of establishing these processes. So I think more often in the larger settings do we see leaders, more appropriately called bosses, not being very direct about who owns what by when and the barriers to get there. The second response I will give you is not everybody thinks the way you think. And I can say that very confidently because I'm very similar to you in this regard. You can't measure something that doesn't exist. Almost by definition, then you can't improve on what we're not measuring. And I think there's a certain analytical / operations savvy type thing that a lot of people have. Many don't. And of course, those folks make it up with strengths in other areas. But I think the greatest kind of compelling component for most organizations to create those processes is when something breaks. So they're kind of flying by the seat of the pants. They get exposed, whatever that exposed might be. Maybe a customer has returned the product, or a customer has had a mishap, go back to the Baxter example. But I think that is when the company starts to say, oh, we might need to get a little more mature around that. So there's an evolutionary process that happens in those smaller organizations.
Right. Well, and speaking of, and I don't want to butcher what you just said, but basically waiting for something to break and then reacting, not being proactive.
Yeah.
You mentioned that idleness is the enemy of progress.
Amen.
Which is a great quote. And this is more of a personal opinion question than specifically financial or business. So unless you have been living under a rock, we all know that Elon Musk bought the little company known as Twitter and let go of nearly 80% of the staff. Now, there was a ton of uproar in the media. However, when he was pushed upon it, it was pretty obvious that there was simply a ton of fat that needed to be cut.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you're not seeing this just in tech companies. You're seeing this in general amongst large corporations across the country. So, Kyle, it's kind of a multi-parter. Do you see this trend continuing? And then to what end will the trimming continue? And then lastly, do you think this will either be good or bad?
Well, I think it's situational, right? So in every environment, every organization, they have a different set of parameters to kind of walk through before making these downsizing or these RIF, reduction in force decisions. I think the short answer to the first question is no. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I think it's something I don't think in business we will ever see the end of that. I think how they play out publicly is probably more of an indicator of whether it's happening or not. But I think it's always been happening. Maybe not at this scale, maybe not at this level of bravado that Musk introduced when the decision was made. And look, I'm not naive, especially in publicly traded companies. There are many masters to serve. And if there is any kind of indication or thought that we are oversized and we've got commitments to the street we must hit, then there's one way to kind of make that happen. If we can't increase profit through the product that we sell or the service that we sell, then let's look at the expense side. And that's usually where that happens. Now, where I think a lot of organizations get it wrong, having worked for 3 Fortune 10 companies in my life, I think a lot of the emphasis is misplaced on short-term views of how the company is performing. Because what happens, at least in many, many times throughout my years, is we'll make some cuts, and 6 months later we're back adding either all of the cuts that we let go or a high percentage of those. So it's I think and Simon Sinek talks about this a lot, and that's the infinite mindset. Oftentimes, especially in bigger organizations, that infinite mindset is confined to a quarter. So we get some kind of moment in time decisions. I think there are ways to combat it. Obviously, just kind of broadening our aperture to something longer than a quarter. But I'm not naive. I understand why that is. But it's also being thoughtful about how we add staff, how the velocity and pace at which we are hiring. Maybe we slow that down rather than reduce what we have, but we don't bring on as quick. So I think, again, it's situational for every industry. But I would not look forward to it ending anytime soon. If anything, we might see more of it in the coming years with the proliferation of AI.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that could be that last moment could be an entire episode on its own. Well, and one thing that when I was going through your book, it every once in a while you come across terms that you kind of know what they are, but you don't know the actual term until you actually read it. And one thing you brought up was the incumbent's curse. And so for listeners at home that are not aware, like I was until just now, the incumbent's curse is a phenomenon where companies are so enamored with their success, they fail to take action and miss the next innovation or radically new opportunity. Now, personally, I've been guilty of this early in my career and many times over. And I was curious, Kyle, for you, and I'm glad you were vulnerable with the ego a little bit earlier. So what have been some of your incumbent curse moments that you've had? And then looking back, how did you put these mental models in place to sharpen your mind and lay waste to the ego?
Yeah, so I've seen it in a number of different forms. Most common in my experience, and I know your question is more of a personal one versus an organizational, but I'll set the table with this. From an organizational perspective, again, having worked for 3 Fortune 10 companies, there is an almost there's a pervasive ideology in some ways that we are too big to fail. And it really shows its ugly head when we go after either repeat business, a contract is up for renewal, or we are bidding on new business. Often the incumbent's curse will put us into some type of malaise that we don't put our best foot forward because we're United Health Group, or we're CVS Health, or we're Bank of America. So it's not too disconnected from arrogance in some ways, I would frame it.
Sure.
For me personally, I think the incumbent's curse is hard to quantify on a personal level. But what I would say, instead of the incumbent's curse, we could just call it personal arrogance or self-unawareness. Yeah. And I think I've suffered from that multiple times throughout my career, especially the first 15 or 20 years. Again, when I was hyper-focused on my own growth and development, getting a bigger paycheck, the incumbent's curse / arrogance would be, I know everything. I have all the answers. I don't need your help. I don't need input from the team, which is all garbage, by the way. None of those things can be true if you want to be a long-term leader with a great leadership legacy. So I think there were probably times in my career where I knew everything and couldn't be told anything otherwise. And that's a shame, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, it's so detrimental. And it's one of those things where we talk about this a lot on our show, where we have experienced guests come on from all walks of life. And the common theme is it's the chicken or the egg. Like we're able to say this now, but if we went back and told our younger selves this, our younger selves would flip the bird. Like it would not sink in. And
so true.
It's interesting though. So mentioning the always be learning and learning as much as you can, that's going to be critical for long-term success. As of this recording, the weekend before was the Berkshire Hathaway conference. Charlie Munger, who is 99 years old, almost 100, frankly, almost dead. That was like his big thing that he brought home to everyone. And you mentioned that, and you stated that the information learned will be critical for unforeseen roadblocks that are heading our way. Now, there have been a couple major memories in my career where, despite trying to read everything I could, there simply was nothing that replaced the hands-on experience. And so for you, I'm sure you've had some of these moments where you've tried to read everything under the sun and it just didn't matter once you got to that moment. So what was that moment or moments, if you've had any of them?
Well, I would, I think this is addressed throughout the book, but also in the principles under two different headlines, if you will. The first is, and I'll jump to right to number 8, we 8, and that is we challenge each other. And I am clear to say in this principle that every challenge must be grounded in one, if not two things, and that's data and experience. Exactly what you just said. Experience is kind of the ultimate educator. So in my organizations, in my teams, and the companies with which I partner to help evangelize these principles, the challenge, if not grounded in either of those components, is complaining. And we're not obliged to listen to that complaint. We 9, by the way, is we embrace challenge, because without that principle, without embracing challenges, both from one another, but just as important externally, we don't embrace those challenges, we're not growing, we're not improving, we're stale, status quo, and we're dead.
Sure.
If we are adamant that every single challenge is filtered through one of those two lenses, we now have a group of people that are subscribed to the same set of principles. They know when the challenge is coming, it's coming from a good place. I have data or experience. My next principle is we must listen and embrace this challenge, so the conversation starts and being open about it. I think where this, to connect it back to the question that you asked, where I think a lot of leaders get it wrong, is assuming they know the answers, not leaning in to their team. Because let's be honest, in throughout my entire career, individuals on the front line or just removed from the front line, they know a hell of a lot more about the organization, the challenges, the operational issues, customer break. They know all of those things way more intimately than the next layer of management, and so on and so on. So certainly by the time when I'm leading 15,000 men and women, I am in no place and in almost no scenario am I the smartest person in the room. But it takes a moment where you have to stop seeing your work personally, which I know is contrary to what a lot of leadership gurus will tell you. It has to do with taking your work and your leadership journey and the nuts and bolts of your work less seriously, because when you can remove the emotion from that, you see things a lot more clearly. That's the point. So when we're able to do that, lean into our team, drop our ego of having to be right and focus more on what is right, it's almost guaranteed to have a better outcome. And what's more important, if we're wrong together. We all came to the same conclusion together. We may have disagreed how we got there, but once we aligned on what the next step is, we're moving forward. By the way, one of the principles also is we pick each other up. So if we do move forward, if we do stumble and we are aligned on that plan that we all failed together, what are we going to do? We're going to pick each other up because that's who we are.
Sure. Well, and speaking of mistakes in turnaround stories, and I'm really glad you spoke about this because it's kind of a forgotten tale. The classic turnaround story that you talked about was when legendary CEO Alan Mulally came into Ford, and between you and me, I think Ford probably wished he stayed around, but it's neither here nor there. Yeah. And, it's pretty common to see these big companies, Ford's just the example you talk about, but they bring in these turnaround specialists. And my question for you is, from your experience, how successful is that process? Because I've personally seen it work out about 50% of the time, if that. But where I do see it happening a lot, now Mully's an exception, is where you've got an amazing company. It's been ran by people that, let's just frankly say, aren't amazing, but because the brand and the business is so great, you can kind of get through the rotten tomatoes before you find the golden goose.
I'm surprised you give it a 50-50, honestly. My experience is much less of a ringing endorsement for turnaround folks.
I round up. So
you round up. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so the reason I'm a little less optimistic about it is, and I'll bring it back to the whole premise of why I do what I do now. If I have to bring an external quote turnaround guru or turnaround expert in to lead this turnaround, who is potentially not going to be there after this turnaround is finished, and I think that's where your question is coming. And there are many, many big firms who make ungodly amounts of money doing this. My experience is I've met a lot of really smart people who don't know the business, who have an objective, and it's usually some type of ROI that is not necessarily consistent with what we're trying to do operationally. And by that, I mean, it's easy for someone to come off the street, spend 2-3 days kind of becoming immersed in our world, and then going back to a C-suite to give a bunch of recommendations. That's easy. But living with those recommendations every single day thereafter is a much different scenario. So where I like to go in this environment or this scenario is, we got to recognize we have a problem, because if we don't talk about the things that we're not excellent about or with, we'll never achieve excellence. And that's what the whole book is about. My whole kind of existence now is around establishing cultures of excellence. Well, you can't do that if we don't first acknowledge what's broken. So once we've acknowledged what's broken, we work together as a team to come up with a plan of action to combat this issue or these issues that we're addressing. Oftentimes that might require external resources, either to get us out of a backlog, to help bring a skill set that we don't have, but we don't necessarily need year round. For example, if there's a big void in our training curriculum, if there's a big void in our learning assessment tools, let's bring in some experts. We will drive their action, because we're going to create our own kind of set of principles and things that are associated with this turnaround. And one of those will be, very down to the gnat's eyelash, the types of things that we must get done. We'll hire those specialists in those areas. They come in, follow our lead, not some external consultant who doesn't know our business. They're not going to lead this turnaround for us. And they will have the same implications as if they were part of a turnaround team as if they were a W-2 person. And that's back to where I went a moment ago. And that is, if we address the issues, because the expertise within our team is almost guaranteed to be much stronger than those from an external perspective. If we lean into each other, maybe pull in external resources for gaps that we have, I think you're much better positioned for a longer term and a better outcome that's much more sustainable based on the inputs from the team.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting. Like when we first connected, because you went from corporate America to your own company, and as I was thinking about that between when we first spoke and today, I know for better or worse, you had to have had some indoctrination into the team culture, which is great to have those tangibles when you started your own company. Now, just a little bit about me here. Like I worked at two of the largest firms in the world, worked for a family firm before Capitalize Your Finances. And even though I was there, I technically never really had a boss per se. Like I was always kind of a lone guy. And also growing up, I'm going to ask for some free advice here. You know, all of my sports were solo. So I golfed. That's solo. I mean, sure, if you got a caddy, but like you're still hitting the shot.
Oh yeah.
Transition to powerlifting and bodybuilding. Newsflash, no one's going to spot you on deadlift. So those are solos. And then, so I've been in this rat race, if you will, of pulling myself up by the bootstraps, getting it done type of guy, because in my surroundings up until this point, there has been no other way. And so from your perspective, if I was the CEO of a company that you're coming to consult with, and knowing that background of unlocking the potential from the team-oriented perspective, you know, what advice would you give to someone like that who's always been the, okay, I've got to get it done mentality, or just another founder to actually move that needle? Because that's got to be difficult.
I'm not sure I follow the question, Chris. Help me some more context, please.
Yeah. So for you, right? Because one of the things I'm sure you get is you got to know the people you're working with, you're coming in to consult. Yeah. So if you've got someone that has come in very similar to you, right? Where come through corporate America, you understand the team working environment. Obviously, you're speaking the same language. And so unlocking team values, the ship's already going. You're probably just steering it here and there, but you kind of got it going. And then for some people, like these small or mid-sized companies, I'm just using myself just to be vulnerable here, right? I've never really had that. I've never really had like a boss per se. And so releasing a lot of that control, and it's not because I'm selfish about it. It's just, you know, that's the surrounding. How do you get people to overcome that?
Yeah, I got it. So, yep. Thank you for the additional context. I think, I think it starts with, and you've already pointed this out, and we touched on it a moment, starts with being vulnerable. I think every leader in this situation must first do some type of self-assessment. What am I good at? What am I not good at? And what do I need to augment to get better at those things that I'm not good at? If I choose to. Obviously, if you're leading the organization and you choose for that to be something that you don't focus your time and energy on, then you better hire somebody who is an expert in that area. And this is where I think a lot of leaders get it wrong in all sizes of organizations. They're not conspicuous about the expectations of the team and the expectations of the leader, which is why I think establishing principles early in the leadership journey You mentioned something a moment ago. Things are kind of on autopilot in some ways, and I think that is a really, really dangerous and slippery slope for people to be aware of and be okay with. But when you establish the principles, we have these guide rails or guard posts, if you will, that kind of keep us on the straight and narrow. And when the leader is vulnerable enough to be called out when not living them him or herself, the team is much more engaged in that journey, and they're much more proactive, and they're much more vocal. They want to play a role because they've been given the opportunity and they're empowered. Which, at the end of the day, I think everyone wants to have an impact. And for me to have an impact, you must empower me to do the things that you hired me to do. So if you've come up in a way that is not really rich with team experience, there are multiple paths, man. I admit this is a little bit of a self-pat on the back, but read my book. And I don't say that to skirt the answer. The point is, the book is very practical, and it gives very black and white steps and a path to establish your culture of excellence. So regardless of your team environment or the team background, leading with these principles in the very simple, very plain spoken language that I used to write the book, it creates a path. That's where I think we have this huge gap in leadership and leadership development today. Everything is so nebular. Everything is very kind of theoretical or academic even, which I think the average leader in the average company has a really hard time relating. And I'll connect that to one final thought. I think a lot of CEOs combat what you're discussing by being really involved and passionate about the company's mission statement. Mm-hmm. But I challenge you in most organizations to walk through, of any size, by the way, to walk through the hallways and ask one person to recite the mission statement.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a high level of success, right? On the contrary, so if they can't even recite it, how can they relate to it? And how does it compel them to be great every day? The answer is they can't relate to it, and it doesn't compel them to be great. On the contrary, when we establish our guiding principles, these are things, and by the way, I'm always the first to admit, the 10 W's are not rocket science. There's no special sauce in there. But what is really special is when you do combine them into a series and call them your system of beliefs, we're subscribed to these, they create a manifesto of sorts where the team knows everybody's role, who's accountable, and the level playing field that we're operating on. So being really overt about that and conspicuously leaning into those principles every single day, almost every interaction, if possible, is how you get that. And then it kind of works upon itself. Momentum is a beautiful thing in this world, Chris. So if you, for example, you said you wanted some free advice. If that's something that you struggle with, recognizing that you've not been in that rich team environment, being open and honest about it the way you just were is the perfect start. Because you know why? People around you want to help you. They do. Mm-hmm. People want to help people. And when you give them the opportunity to do so, and you say thank you along the process or along the path, especially when you get to the end of that journey, you now have a connection that you didn't have before. They feel great for having helped pick you up. You've picked up a new skill, a new set of knowledge, whatever the case is. And by the way, also, if the person who has offered to help you delivers content that is not helpful, by the way, that's also helpful to you. Believe it or not, right? So some of my best leadership lessons were from terrible leaders. So me watching what not to do is the lesson learned there. So you may get those instances in your journey as well. And I think they're just as valuable.
Yes, that's actually one of the most valuable mental models that I've established over the last couple of years. And I don't mean to go back to him, but Charlie Munger has a great quote where he says, tell me where I would die so I don't go there. And you stick to that, and it's
simply profoundly simple.
Yes, absolutely. And when we first met, it took me about 5 seconds to realize you clearly love what you do. And you also, maybe almost even more, love the people that you are serving. And that's where I've connected very quickly with you. Okay. And one piece of advice that you speak about that I completely agree with, but I'm going to put an asterisk to it, is you preach to be hyper vigilant looking for the first opportunity to pick up a team member, which again, I agree with it. But I'm saying it with an asterisk because I have struggled with the balancing act of it, whatever that may be, and in almost wanting it more than the person I'm talking to. And that can be dangerous. And so, brother to brother, how do you recommend leaders balance that internal struggle? Because it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless.
And let me make sure I'm understanding the context of the question. How do you balance your will, your desire, your passion for picking someone up who doesn't carry their end of the bargain? Is that where you're going?
So let's say that we're business partners. Okay, let's use a real life example. And you want to come work for me. We'd have a lot of fun. And I've got all of these plans, visions, goals for what you're trying to do. But at the same time, as we go through, right, let's say a month or two or whatever, you're doing all the right work. But maybe I wanted something more than what you've wanted for yourself. And that can be, again, that's a good problem because it's much better than the other way around.
Right.
But it's one of those things where I think it's very, I don't know, it's not really addressed as leaders. And so how do you balance that as a leader?
Good. Yeah. So you're referring to we number 6, and that's we pick each other up. Yes. And there are 2 components to this we. The first is an absolute obligation for anyone who has direct reports. So I'm clear to say maybe that's a boss, maybe that's a leader. They're not the same thing. But if a team member is struggling, and that could include issues outside of work that are preventing them from being their best inside the workplace. Sure. We must be aware of those things. Not every nasty detail, but we must be aware because we're all human. We bring baggage to work. To act like that doesn't happen is really naive. We must pick them up, extend a hand, tell them they are the right person for the job, provided that you think they are. Help them get to a point where the mistake that was made or the issue that's gotten them off track is addressed and behind you. But, and the second component, and I think this is where it's germane to your question, is as leaders, we should be obligated to lift members of our team to new heights. And that can mean any number of things. But the best example I can give is, and I tell this to folks, to leaders on my team now, if they want to go do something outside of our organization, I will help them get there. I will help them. I will work on their resume with them. I will do mock interviews. I will connect them to people if there's a company or a connection that I have that they, from which they could benefit. Why? And it sounds a little kind of hard to grasp because especially if they're a high performer, well, don't you want to keep them around? Well, they're not going to be a high performer forever. I would rather have a role in them ascending to new heights because it feels good and it's the right thing to do. And if for whatever reason that venture that they're chasing doesn't work out, and this happened to me, by the way, I had an employee of many years come to me, say he had found a role externally he wanted to pursue, and he felt like his time working together, our time working together had come to an end. And he was shocked. And I said, well, let me help you. We did mock interviews. I helped with his resume. He went through the interview process, ultimately did not get the role. How do you think he behaved and what was his level of effort towards me and around me after he went through this whole process where his boss was helping him get a job at another company? He never worked harder afterwards. He was so committed, right? If you juxtapose that with the person who, whether it's a sense of entitlement, whether they are a little too happy with themselves, whether they are a little proud, I don't know what the right descriptor might be. If you balance, the scenario I just mentioned with that type of person who feels like it is your responsibility to help them get to where they need to be. In some ways it is, by the way. If there are barriers, it is our responsibility as leaders to remove that barrier. But I can't make you show up to work. I can't make you give 100% when you're there, more days than you don't give 100%. I can't make you care, which is obviously a vital ingredient to any long-term success is caring, especially as a leader. Knowing I can't do those 3 things for you, we have to have a very serious conversation and be really direct about it and say, Chris, man, I want great things for you. I care a lot about you. I want you to be your very, very best, but I can't want it for you. And then I like to be very specific in the types or the scenarios that I have witnessed that would kind of amplify the argument that I'm making, or the point that I'm trying to make, that they don't care as much as I do. And once that conversation is had, I give it once, because I'm dealing with this scenario now with an employee. Once we're on the record that this is, I can't do these things for you, but I will do, if you meet me halfway, I will keep running with you, man. I promise you that. The next scenario where I notice that that's not happening, and they've kind of they've strayed, and they're leaning on something else, or they're asking me or needing me to do more than my fair share, I'm done. Because I would rather invest my time in someone who is committed to their own growth, who is committed to the collective we, the royal we's excellence. I am much more, I need to spend that time, valuable time, on someone who's on board and someone who's ready to make that journey with me, versus trying to pull someone along.
Right. Well, and this is the opposite of pulling someone along. This is like cleaning out the fat. You touched on a previous job, and I was stunned when I heard this, that there was a division of a company that was creating 583 reports, where you really could have whittled it down to, in my mind, I'm going, okay, maybe a dozen. But then as I thought about it, I was like, maybe 3. And then you kind of call it good. And maybe 3 is too many. Too many numbers. From your experience, how common is that? Because again, I've never ascended to the Fortune 10. And so how common is that to find in these massive companies? And then also, how easy is it to correct?
Dude, it's way more common than anyone will ever admit to you publicly.
Really?
And it's not out of malice. It's not out of a lack of care. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. It is, hey, we have a new manager running X business unit who is used to a report that looks like this, or John, the new leader over in accounts payable, he's used to seeing a report that looks like that. And the good souls of that analytics and reporting team, they just took the order, filled it, made sure that John had the report he was looking for, and it was to the specs that he wanted. And then these things snowball. And meanwhile, it's quite possible that one of the bespoke reports that John is requesting being built already exists, and just a slight different, kind of flavor, but still provides the data he needs. Back to your point around consolidating. But I wouldn't confine this only to reporting. I know what happens in especially bigger organizations is something breaks, and to combat that break or make sure it doesn't ever happen again, we implement some type of QA check, or we implement some process or procedure that should establish some guardrails. Well, maybe that involves a bunch of extra labor also. Fast forward 3, 4, 5 years later, it's quite possible we have gotten so good at this error that these extra steps are no longer needed, and they're wasteful at this point. But no one takes the time to go back and revisit the health or maturity or the evolution of our processes to say, is this necessary? Is this, which is why back to we challenge each other, because I want an organization where people say, why do we do this? Like, why do we do this? Think like you're the founder of the organization. And if you can't connect value to our customers or our employees, why are we doing it? Maybe there's a compliance thing, and I get that. There are exceptions, but that's why the rule exists, is to make sure that we don't do things unnecessarily. Like, which leads me to another we, and that's we number 7, is we measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity. In bigger organizations, activity is everywhere. It's rampant, and people confuse that with progress. They confuse activity with being, with winning and with evolving. And similarly, I say, why are we doing this? Why are we having this meeting? Can we point to an outcome that is absolutely aligned with this activity? If not, we should question whether it continues or not. I think it's rampant. It's not just reporting. It is in any number of operational processes. And by the way, in many cases, it is self-preservation. They hired me to do this work. If we no longer need this work any longer, then I may be out of a job. I look at it quite differently. If I add a lot of value in anything that I'm doing, if the thing that I'm doing is being eliminated, I've shown that I can add value, there's an opportunity for me somewhere else on the team.
Sure. And by the way, I did not mean to chuckle a little bit halfway through that, because as you were saying, why are we doing this? Like, why are we here? I know my social media team, including my brother, is going to listen back to that and he's going to go, oh my gosh, if you only knew how many times Chris would say that. And as a brother, right, I'm saying it like, why are we here? And he sees me as a brother going, oh my gosh, like what is going on? But then you talk to other people like, why are we doing this? So you gave me some validation, which I appreciate. Now, I want to give a very surface level question to you. Okay. And it's kind of a funny one. On a scale of 1 to 10, because we have the same pet peeve with useless meetings. How large of a pet peeve? So first part, scale 1 to 10, how large of a pet peeve is unnecessary meetings to you?
If I'm confining this to my professional life, it's a 9.
It's a 9. Okay.
Yeah.
So part 2 is, what is the most irritating repeat meeting you have ever been a part of?
We should put a disclaimer underneath that the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Yes. Okay.
Because, this could get me in trouble, but I'm living it now. I'm part of a recurring meeting. It was twice a week. We reduced it to once a week, and it's really kind of it's an opportunity for client and contractor to discuss an ongoing punch list of improvement opportunities.
Okay.
It's a big company, so change doesn't happen fast. We don't make the moves as quickly as we might think they could be made. And I found myself showing up for this meeting once a week, running through the same list of items and getting the same responses without an ETA, without a, here's what's next type thing. Now, occasionally there'd be an update, a real update, a substantive update sprinkled in, but it's everyone's time is too valuable to rehash the exact same conversation we had the week before. Everyone's rates are too high. And what's really, and this is the tragedy of the reporting example I mentioned earlier, is you have so many people focused on a set of activity, which is great, right? But if they weren't focused on that activity, what goodness could they deliver for the organization? What impact could they have? And probably, by the way, be more fulfilled in that impact because it's new, it's innovative, it's something different than the same tired, stale reports. So that's kind of where I am today. Now, I must share though, I had a conversation with the person who sits on the other side of the table of this virtual meeting with me every week, and he got it. And I apologize. I said, if I was a little snarky recently, it's because I don't see the value of this time. Like, let's not have them. I would much rather you call me 10 minutes before the meeting and say, we ain't having it because we don't have any updates, versus let's just show up and walk this dance or do this dance that when you don't have updates, nobody wants to admit they don't have any updates. So we throw a bunch of word salad at you to kind of get you off the agenda. I just don't think that's a good use of anybody's time.
No, I totally hear you. And to give listeners a hint, that company is not Capitalize Your Finances. So then it leaves it open and no one's going to guess who this is or what this is. Now, you mentioned challenging the status quo, and that can be both extremely difficult and extremely rewarding. And one of the nails on the head that you hit very hard was the comparison of BlackBerry versus Apple in the early 2000s. So from your perspective, where do you see a seismic shift in that equivalent in regards to the new head honcho of the business world? I'm not asking for investment advice here for compliance people listening in. I'm just asking friend to friend, what do you see given your role?
Chris, I need more context again. I'm not connecting the dots with the Apple BlackBerry story.
Yeah. So BlackBerry was always set in their ways. They didn't really want to push the needle, innovate.
Incumbent's curse, my man.
The incumbent's curse. And so Apple took that bull by the horns. And, obviously we know the rest is history. They went with the screen, no buttons on the phone. Right. And they saw that huge seismic shift that frankly no one was touching, but it was right in front of everyone's eyes. And pun intended, they capitalized on it. And so do you see an equivalent of that in the world where you see an opportunity, maybe whether it's in AI, whether it's in maybe technology in general, just from your vantage point from dealing with all of these corporations?
Man, I think we see it every day, but we've become so accustomed to it
Yes.
And maybe not seismic might not be the best word for what I'm referencing, but the iPhone came out in 2004.
Is that wild?
Less than 20 years ago. If I would have told, obviously I got some years on you, but if you would have told me actually in 2003 even that I would in my hand hold a device in 2023 that has thousands of photos on it, can stream millions of songs, I can watch television, I would have told you you're crazy. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the shift to the tactile, away from the tactile keys to the touch screen was huge. I was a late adopter to that, admittedly, because again, I just exposed my age. I thought it was a fad, or just a phase. We have gotten so accustomed to major technological breakthroughs that we're almost numb to it. Think about Chat GPT, right? I don't know how intimate you are with Chat GPT. I use it for copy for some of my social media. I use it to inspire thoughts and be provocative about blog posts. It's obviously having a huge impact in universities. So I think it's everywhere. We're just so overwhelmed with cool stuff, frankly, but also game-changing technology that we don't stop to recognize. I mean, the internet, for example, it's less than 100 years old. Mm-hmm. I mean, way less than 100 years old. And can you imagine a life without the internet today? I mean, that sounds so cliche, man, but I think there are two things that are still happening. We are seeing and will continue to see the introduction of new technology that is something the lay person, at least like myself, I don't know about you, never dreamt was possible. And it solves a problem I didn't know I had to solve. Yeah. And I think that's what Jobs' ethos was around. Let's solve problems that people don't know they have yet, versus the simple ones that everyone's aware of that everyone else is trying to solve. So I think there's that component. But so there is this iterative stuff that's happening with small, I would call them singles and doubles, maybe not a home run from BlackBerry to iPhone. Right. So we're seeing that more and more every day. And we're becoming more numb to it every single day. I mean, electric vehicles is another great example, I think, compared to just, and I think that the pace at that evolution and the size of those, what would be a seismic event is going to be a lot less because we've become more accustomed to them.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. ChatGPT, we've had a couple guests before you on, and one of them, Danielle DiMartino Booth, wrote a great book, Fed Up, on the Federal Reserve. Totally not controversial. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah. You need to go pick it up. And we really unpacked it. And one of the things that's interesting about ChatGPT, we're not going to turn this into the ChatGPT podcast, but it's one of those things where one of the investors I look up to a lot, his name's Monish Pabrai, and his whole philosophy on it is the same on when the internet was blowing up in 99. Was there value there? Of course. Mm-hmm. Did we know that it was going to stick around? Yeah. Did we know the most right answer? That was almost impossible to figure out. Right. Yep. And it's the same thing with ChatGPT. The one thing that I've been curious about is it's extremely valuable. We've used it for certain things, for not really my work, but like the show and branding and all of that. The one thing that's going to be interesting is how they match it with the usage and convert it into dollars. And we're starting to see that, but it's not black and white. It was interesting. You were mentioning like the value of internet and all that. So another guest we've had on, Seth Steven Davidowitz, he wrote a book, Don't Trust Your Gut. Your homework is to read that sucker and then shoot me a text on the value, because there's a couple tidbits in there where I was like, oh my gosh. So now you talk about remembering the difficult time. This is one of my favorite things that I was almost nostalgic about when I was reading your book. You talk about remembering the difficult times to appreciate where you are now. Now, I've thought about this extensively as of late. And I don't know about you. I wouldn't do my first 4 years over again. But at the same time, I would give anything to relive those days, because some of those were the best days of my life. And at the time, it's so easy to think back to when it was easier. And in my eyes, the greatest challenge is always today.
Hmm.
So, in your experience, if you can give me some of your worldly wisdom, okay, of your vintage years, as you've said, how do you balance the knowing that it's both the most challenging time, but also enjoy the ride and not wish for your life to pass you by?
Wow, man, if we could package that answer and monetize it, we are in a very happy place, you and I. What's that expression? Ignorant. What is it? Ignorance is wasted on the young. What's There's an expression there, and the spirit of the expression is basically, if I had known then what I know now.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a journey that everyone, all of us are on, especially as it relates to our careers, because the things that stress us earlier in our career, the things that give us satisfaction early in our career, at least in my experience, are not either of the things that stress me or bring me satisfaction today.
Sure.
And it's really about embracing the process, embracing the journey. But that is wasted. That thought, frankly, at least for me, was wasted because I was too young to recognize the journey, the steps of those journey, the painful steps, the wins along the way. I was so focused on every specific and individual metric by which I was held accountable, my salary, the number of people that report. I was focused on all the wrong things. And, I think that with the benefit of experience, and by that I mean age, you do start to realize what matters most. And when it really became painfully clear to me when I made the decision to leave corporate America and write the book, I spent the first year in what I call detox, because I didn't know it, but I was equating my existence with who I am, my identity, with this corporate America guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not right. That's not who I am. But we become so enthralled in the day to day, not seeing the journey, the bigger journey that we're on, that we lose sight of every one of those experiences is a good one, whether you realize it or not at the time. It's a good one because you're better off for having had it. You're smarter. You understand what not to do. You understand what pitfalls not to pursue. You learn through those things. A friend of mine has this expression: new levels, new devils. So as things get bigger, you take on more. You're exposed to tougher and more difficult things, which make the things prior a little less daunting, because new levels, new devils, new challenges, new experiences, maybe monumentally stronger or different than what you experienced in the past. So I wish I had a better answer other than to say, I don't think I recognized it at the time. I think this type of understanding either comes with age, or you have some source of inspiration or influence in your life that tells you, and you have to believe it. So you're not listening to some starchy uncle at the Christmas party who says, back in my day, because there is wisdom in that. But you have to be willing and open to understanding, okay, what's got me bent out of shape today, or the thing that is so important to me today, 20 years from now is probably not going to matter. But you have to be open to that counsel, to that feedback, to that coaching. So for me, and by the way, I'm not naive to the fact that with the proliferation of social media, I think there's a level of self-awareness that probably didn't exist when I was coming up. I think people are a lot more connected to themselves, good or bad. It's a different conversation, different podcast, than we were at my friend group growing up. So it's a long-winded way of saying, man, if I knew then what I knew now, I probably would approach things a little bit differently. But I'm also the kind of guy, Chris, that I don't have a lot of regrets in life, because I do believe I'm in this chair talking to you today for a reason. I believe we've crossed paths for a reason. I believe I wrote the book for a reason. I believe everything in my life that most external viewers would say were negative, I don't view it that way. Because if that didn't happen, it wouldn't open the door to whatever scenario. Every bad breakup you had leads to the next person. I'm married now. So those are things, while painful at the time, the benefit of time allows you to look back and say, well, they really weren't mistakes. They were just part of my journey. And that's what we're doing right now.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting, I agree with you on looking back. And it's easier said than done now because, financially, like, we've both moved our needle. And so you can open up your eyes to another layer of the world that unfortunately, some people just will never get there, and that is unfortunate. Struggle is relative. But I will say, looking back, at least in my purview, I wasn't able to enjoy it because, let's face it, like,
that's right.
All of these hopes and dreams and desires are great, but if you don't have two pennies to string together, done, right?
What
Out
matters,
the window.
Yeah.
Which I totally get it. And I'm so thankful also for you that you did discover that, hey, my identity is not tied in. We've worked with a ton of business owners that have sold their business. And I can tell you, not always, some of them are very thankful to get the hell out of there. But the ones that have started from nothing and they sell it out, you would think, oh, they've got this wind flow of 2, 3, 5, sometimes $35 million. They come in afterwards, they've got that windfall. Yeah. They'll break down for hours.
Yeah.
Because that was who they were. Mm-hmm. And that part of them dies. It's really, really sad. And speaking of the emotion, so, the more emotionally that you're invested in your team's performance, the less clearly you can see what's really happening, which I totally get it. Okay. It's the whole conundrum of, do you think with your heart or do you think with your head? Okay. Sure. And when I read that, I was in total agreement, but it also struck me with profound curiosity.
Yep.
And so for smaller companies and smaller company founders that listen to our show, especially in service-based businesses, in a way, I think it's almost nearly impossible to not become emotionally attached to your team, clients, and professionals you're working with. And I completely get it for larger corporations, but for small to mid-sized companies, what advice would you give to these founders or executives?
Well, let me clarify. I don't say don't be emotional or connected to your teams.
Right.
I think we've got to really do a self-assessment on how emotionally connected we are to the results. And your slight pushback on this notion is so warranted, because the first time it was introduced to me, I thought it was BS. For your audience, a bit of quick context. I learned this lesson in my late 20s. I can't say I was good at it until maybe my 40s. But when it was introduced to me, I was with a health plan, multi-billion-dollar health plan, was in an operations review, going through my team's results, and the chief medical officer, who had a reputation for being kind of a cantankerous dude, put me in a corner and just kind of beat me up over a bunch of results. And it was disheartening to me, because I knew how hard my team was working to turn those results around and to deliver the product that we were delivering, which was light years better than what it was years, but certainly even months before. Mm-hmm. So I got defensive. I didn't take the criticism well, and it was obvious. I suppose it was obvious. The room got awkwardly quiet. Everyone was leaning down on their phone, kind of hoping it would go away. So later that day, I got a phone call from the chief medical officer's assistant, who said, "Ace would like to see you. Would you mind walking over?" We were in a big campus, so I walked over, and I'll never forget this. And I don't even know if Ace Hodgen, Dr. Hodgen, is even around any longer. That's how old the story is. But I was not a fan of his. I thought he was a very difficult, crotchety old man until this moment, this interaction. He calls me into the office, sits down, asks a few questions of me, kind of personal questions, because he didn't know me. And he said, by the way, Kyle, earlier today, you seemed pretty defensive when it came to your team's results and the criticism I offered. And I was like, yeah, of course I was, Ace. That's my team, man. We are very passionate about delivering those results, and we're working very hard to deliver those results. So when you attack them, the results, you attack me, you attack the team. And Chris, at the time, he was probably mid to late 60s, leans across his desk, and he says, "You're taking this very personal." I said, "I am." And he said one word: "Don't." And then he leaned back. And I go, "What do you mean, don't, man? That's so counterintuitive. I've worked so hard for this. It makes no sense to me." And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's kind of ultimately what made it in the book. And that was, the less emotional you can be around your team's results, the more clearly you can see what's going on. And in hindsight, I had forgotten about that story actually until I started to write the book. And in hindsight, looking back, it's so true. He's so right, because I became defensive about my team, and I wanted to feel as if I was shouldering the criticism for them, which when you're defensive about any topic, you're less focused on that topic and more focused about being right about that topic, which was a lesson hard learned for me. And again, I didn't get good at practicing that until my 40s. So to connect it to your question, I think I would really strongly encourage CEOs, especially of smaller organizations, to be really connected with your teams, understand what makes them tick, understand where they want to go in their career, understand what it means to them to be a part of your team. Like, be really open, overt, and vulnerable about your role and their role and how you need each other to exist. But do not connect their emotion, their activity, their wants, their desires. Don't connect that to the results. If you worry about the results only and you take those results personally, you get hyper-focused on that and not how you improve them, not who's going to improve them, not what it takes for that person to improve them. So we've got to stop focusing so maniacally on the results, and let's focus maniacally on the people that deliver the results, because I've found when you take that approach, one takes care of the other.
Sure. Well, it's one theme that my teammate Betty and I have in the office is your number one employee is always more important than your number one client. Because if your number one client leaves,
oh, true,
you magically have a number one client. Your number one employee leaves, which in this case would be Betty, and we'd have 100% turnover, and I would, be incredibly depressed, right? But I'm dead serious. It's like, it's always about the people. And Kyle, I know we're coming to a close here, and I could talk your ear off all day long. And since I know our time is coming to a close, I wanted to ask a couple parting questions that I think our listeners would find helpful and exciting about you. So what do you have going on right now in your life that just gets you hyped to wake up every day? Do you have any future projects or collabs? Do you have any books in the future? Are there any products that you want to, promote on the show? The floor is yours.
It's an easy one. I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it right now. As cliche as your audience might find it, or even corny, this is my purpose. This is why I'm here. Not here with you today. This is why I'm on this planet. I have found such a tremendous satisfaction and greater fulfillment than I ever knew possible by living these principles. Chris, when you have a complete stranger reach out on you on social media to say the principles in your book changed my life and changed how I raise my children, I'm done. There is nothing, there is no greater compliment to me. I have yet to have a person reach out and say, hey, Kyle, help us. Thank you for helping us deliver that CSAT number, or, that Kager, or whatever your performance metric is. I have yet to have someone call years later, or a stranger call and thank me for those. I get so energized about the reception that the book has had. I told my wife when I started to write the book, if I sold 1,000 copies, I'd be over the moon. We are 10x that right now.
Sure.
And it's humbling, mind blowing. Any adjective I could find to describe that, but it is what motivates me and inspires me. And all I'm doing is traveling the country, soon to be traveling the world, to also evangelize these principles as wide and as far as I can. And I can say this because I am at a point in my life where I'm lucky enough to be able to say this. I'm not doing this for money. I didn't write the book to sell money. I've done speeches for nothing, and I've done them for several $1,000s, depending on where the organization is and their journey. I will not let money get in the way of me helping them on their path to a culture of excellence. So it is the thing that gets me up and gets me going every single day. And I get so much satisfaction, and with the benefit of recognizing the down days are just a step in the road, and they're part of this process, like we just talked about, right? And being really grateful for when we have really big breakthrough wins as well.
Right. Well, and I can tell you, I know for a fact you brought someone to, I'm thinking, positive tears. I hope the mic did not bring this, pick this up, but I heard my little Abigail crying profusely as you were saying your purpose. So for better or worse, you brought her to tears, my friend. And which is, hey, that's a compliment. Okay. Now for you to close it out, okay, because we always want our capitalizers to follow you to the end of the world. So where can our capitalizers go to best support the legend that is Kyle McDowell?
Well, thank you for that. At Kyle McDowell Inc. on nearly every social platform. My website is kylemcdowellinc.com. And as you've mentioned a few times so graciously, and I'm so appreciative, the book is Begin With We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. You know what? I'll close with this, Chris. I'm asked a lot, are the 10 We's the only way? And my answer is no. The point here is to define your leadership principles, document them, spend time coming up with them, go to a dark room somewhere and just lock yourself and say, what do I want to be known for? What do I want this team to be known for? And what do I want my leadership legacy to be? Something I think very few people in corporate America ask. How do I want to be remembered? Not as a boss, but as a leader. What do I want people to say about me when my time comes to an end? Document those principles, align with your team around those principles, and lean into them every single day. They should be part of your vernacular. They could be 3, they could be 5, they could be 10. But whatever works for you and something that you are comfortable being held accountable to, and you are certainly comfortable holding others accountable to those same principles. And I think that can transform your existence in corporate America. You go from apathy to fulfillment, and you find passion that you may have lost throughout your career journey to date.
Absolutely. Well, Kyle, thank you so much. And to those that are listening in, as always, thank you for tuning in to Capitalize Your Finances. You veterans out there know the deal by now, but to you newbies, first off, welcome. Second, if you have any questions or comments about today's episode, hit me up by either giving us a call at 253-214-3050 or shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com. If you are listening in, you say, man, I want to become a guest on the Cap in Capitalize's show. Head on over to capitalizepodcast.com where we check our inquiries daily. And if you are oh so fortunate, you may be the next guest on Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Kyle McDowell and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.